All right, you're good to go.
Hi, everybody, and welcome into this week's edition of our ShawLocal.com Bears Insider podcast. I am Hub Arkush, along with our Shaw Media Group sports editor, Kyle Nabors, and our ShawLocal.com Bears Insider beat reporter, Sean Hammond. We're looking forward to spending a little time with you again today. Before I even get started, we want to thank our friends at Heinz Lumber, our great sponsor of all these podcasts, 11 locations in the Chicagoland area. For all of your contracting or building needs, make sure you find the Heinz Lumber closest to you. We also want to remind you that it'd be great if you want to just download a subscription to the podcast. You don't have to worry about finding us all the time. You can do that by going to the App Store on your phone or to iTunes or to shawlocal.com. On the other hand, you can also join us live via Twitter. And I guess, Kyle, are there other ways besides via Twitter for folks to join us live during these broadcasts?
Yeah, so I share the YouTube link through your Twitter and retweet it through our Bears Insider Twitter account as well. That way, if you're on Twitter and watching, that's great. If you want to jump in, if you go to that YouTube link, though, you can actually ask us questions in the chat. We can pull them up on screen, which is great for us, particularly this time of year. We're looking for topics to talk about. You can only get so far with OTA talk. So once again, jump into the YouTube chat. Send us your questions. It can be Bears, can be NFL. It can really be anything you want. We're willing to talk whatever you want to talk about today.
Yeah, and the great part is getting all of you involved in the conversation. So if you weren't aware of this, if you're hearing the podcast now and you're saying, well, how do I know when to join? If you follow my Twitter account at Hub_Arkush, follow Sean. Is there an underscore in yours, Sean?
Yes, there is. Sean_Hammond.
Sean_Hammond. How about you, Kyle? Your whole.
I'm just at Kyle Nabors.
All right. Follow any or all of our Twitter accounts. We will give you plenty of notice as to when we're starting. We've been averaging about 1 o'clock on Thursday afternoon, but that's not set in stone. But sure, keep an eye on it if you'd like to join the podcast. You can get your questions answered. We're happy to listen to your thoughts and opinions as well and kick them around and break them down. So thank you all so much, however you're joining us today. And we look forward to visiting with you today and every week going forward. And kind of the story today, guys, is Sean and I were out at Hallis Hall on Wednesday for the last media availability with OTAs. The final OTA workout was supposed to be on Thursday of this week. That'd be June 10th. Next week, we will be, at least for now, we will be at the veteran mini camp, which is mandatory Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of next week. A number of teams, not a number, but a few teams around the league have canceled them or made them voluntary. That's all part of kind of an interesting league-wide topic that maybe we'll get into a little later today about why that's all going on. But we did get another look at the Bears. Sans all of the defensive starters, except for Roquan Smith, much like last week, and some of the offensive players joined in this week too. It was not dramatically lower turnout, but there were a few less guys. And Sean, I know, as is going to be the case, at least till we get to the regular season, all eyes tend to be on Andy Dalton and Justin Fields, and more on Justin Fields than Andy Dalton right now, particularly with most of the defense not there. And that certainly was the topic yesterday, as Matt Nagy said afterwards when we talked to him. They got a little sloppier yesterday. It wasn't all that impressive. I didn't think Dalton or Fields looked particularly good over the course of the hour and 40-minute workout. But Justin Fields did make a few throws yesterday that really kind of opened everybody's eyes and kind of turned on the conversation.
Yeah, Hub. I mean, sloppy football is to be expected this time of year. We're in early June, and these guys aren't all on the same page at this point. We saw some botched snaps and some other ugliness out there. But you're right. I mean, when Justin Fields unloads those deep balls, anybody who watched him against Clemson saw what ability he has in those situations. And there was one throw yesterday that was just really darn impressive down the left sideline during 7-on-7s. I think it was to Demir Bird down the left sideline for a touchdown. And we don't want to make too much out of these plays in the middle of in early summer, really late spring, whatever you want to call it. But it was a play that got the sideline buzzing. The Bears sideline at practice was everybody saw that and was impressed with that. And it's far too early to make a whole lot out of it, but we did see some struggles from both quarterbacks during the course of practice. Andy Dalton threw a couple of interceptions. Both of them were having some snap issues at one point or another with different centers, and there was just a lot of sloppiness out there too.
Yeah, forgive me, everybody. I just took a bite of something and realized that's going to be part of our podcast too, with the chewing into the mic. I will not do that again, I promise. I'm also just noticing Kyle's nice, clean, fresh haircut here, which, this is the joys of when you join us live during these podcasts. But, Kyle, it is funny because the deep ball that Sean is talking to Demir Bird, everybody, it caught our attention. And then visiting with Damian Williams, the new backup running back afterwards, he was talking about a great throw that Fields made, and I forget who asked the question, but they assumed they were talking about the deep ball. He said, no, this was a totally different play. This was on a cover 2, where he had to thread it through a hole and back shouldered it and put it in exactly the perfect spot and zipped it in there. So there's no questioning the arm talent. But what fans need to realize is there was no questioning the arm talent, halfway through his career at Ohio State. It's everything else that he has to learn that is the reason that he's almost certainly, unless there's an injury, and even in that case, I don't know if it's not Nick Foles, he's going to start the season on the bench.
Yeah, he's an extremely talented passer. The physical talent that is there. The question that you have with Justin Fields is how quickly is he going to learn to read and react to an NFL defense? We're not going to know that throughout these OTAs, throughout training camp. It's really hard to tell. We'll have a better idea during preseason. But just as a note, I was telling Sean before we jumped on here, just this is how excited people are about Justin Fields. We're able to watch the metrics for our newspapers of what people are reading online, right, Hub? And across all of our publications, the Justin Fields thing was near the top of the list of everything read on our website, not just sports. I'm talking news, everything yesterday. And that was just on a story talking about Justin Fields' deep throws in an OTA. The hype is definitely already there. It should be interesting to see how it builds throughout training camp. And speaking of, you guys were out at House. I'm kind of the guy behind the scene. You guys were out at House yesterday. Given the heat and humidity already early this summer, did it feel a little bit more like a day down in Bourbonnais, Hub?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's good to hear that about Justin Fields, because I've actually got a few more Fields stories or columns I haven't written yet, but I thought we were overdoing it. So now I know what I'm going to be doing for the next few days.
I don't think we can overdo it with Justin Fields at this point, based on the social media reaction.
Yeah, that is becoming clear. Kyle, it's funny because Matt Nagy actually commented on the weather afterwards and pointed out he called it great weather. He said, nice heat, get a good sweat going. It was not, the humidity isn't as bad as what we're used to in Bourbonnais and even sometimes in Platteville going way back. But certainly the heat was there. The players are basically out there. They have helmets. They're not wearing any pads. Most of them are in shorts. So it's not unmanageable. And this is the training part of the off season anyway. So they're happy about that. But it has been unusually hot. What that can lead to sometimes is tempers flaring, but we haven't seen anything resembling that yet out there. So they had some new stuff going on yesterday, Sean. There was somebody on a bullhorn or a megaphone or something that was calling out the drills that we've never heard before. They actually worked some heavy metal into the playlist on the music that they blast for everybody, which is usually about 65% hip hop and 44% various forms of rock, but never heard any heavy metal before. So I thought that was an interesting addition yesterday too. That you immediately begin to wonder, is that some of the new free agents or rookies, or why is that happening? But Kyle, you raise an interesting point, and we're just going to kind of float around here. We'll come back to a couple of crucial subjects. But we were talking about this among some of us in the media yesterday. There was a report from a, quote, citizen journalist, close quote, and I always worry about these folks because they talk about their sources, and yet those of us who do this for a living check with our sources, and nobody knows who they are. But this particular person, and I'm not trying to diss him, I don't remember what the name or the handle was on Twitter, claimed that according to sources, the Bears were already making plans for fan attendance at training camp at Hallis Hall. And when you mention Bourbonnais and the conditions out there, that's interesting because there's no question that when the Bears decided to leave Bourbonnais and keep training camp at home, which was prior to the pandemic, that's not why they were at Hallis Hall last year. It was with the idea that there would be some fan attendance, but Sean, I'll go to you first and then come back to Kyle. Even with the expanded parking lot, with the great facilities that they have out there, there's some of the best facilities in the NFL, and I've been around a lot of them, and I can tell you that is real. I still don't understand how it would work with live fan attendance in groups of more than 50 or 100. So I wouldn't count on that if I'm a fan. Now, I could very well be wrong. I don't know what the plan is, but it's just hard to imagine how they would do that, particularly with all the restrictions they have on what media is allowed to report and comment on what they see.
I've been thinking the same thing, Hub. Even going back to last training camp, that was the first one at Hallis Hall, and like you said, that was the plan all along before the pandemic. And I remember standing out there and same with this spring, and I just don't know where they're going to put people because there's not an obvious place to put them. There aren't bleachers, there aren't stands of any kind. There's a little rooftop there's like a little patio on top of the new wing of the building, but I don't know where else they're going to possibly put fans, especially if they're out on that field by the Walter Payton Center. I mean, there doesn't seem to be anywhere for them to go.
It's been a couple of years since I've been out there, but I know during the renovation when they were expanding that out there, I mean, it's tree lined all the way around there, right? And then there's railroad tracks on the one side. There's not like a lot of room where you could have, let's say even a couple thousand people, which would be a fraction of what they had down in Bourbonnais. If you brought in portable stands, is there enough room between that tree line to even put people there?
No, and I don't think they could put them between that east field and the tree line because A, there's not that much space there, and B, they tend to work on different fields each day. And if you came all the way out there with those bleachers and then found out that they were 200 yards away, I don't think you'd be particularly happy. I think the one area, and I will tell you, Kyle, you got to get out there because the renovation is sorry guys, nothing I could do about that one. I tried. I held it off for about 3 minutes. Having a rough day today. The renovations are spectacular, and you need to see it. And to Sean's point, there are some existing setups where they could probably put a group of 100, some kind of special deal. But when we start talking about thousands, there's no way. The one place where they could, and then as you may recall, two of the practice fields are actually separated a couple hundred yards from the main practice fields back behind the Walter Payton Center. There is no space around there to put anything. You could have people stand around the outside, but that doesn't make a lot of sense. And then when you get to these main practice facilities attached to the building, the one area is at the south end of the fields. There is a wide concourse type dirt track that really is there for them to drive around with equipment and move things around. And then there's a drainage ditch behind that. You could conceivably erect some bleachers there at both at the end of both fields. And my best guess is, and I'm not expert at that, you might be able to get seating for 400 or 500, maybe 600, but that would be making it pretty tight. And that's still, to Sean's point, they used to get excited on the days in Bourbonnais when we had 6,000, 8,000. And the people kept coming, and that's not going to happen at Hallis Hall.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. There is some space there on that south side, but without seeing what the plan is, I don't know how they would go about doing that. I suppose you could put some bleachers up there, but no matter what, like you're saying, Hub, it's not going to be a lot of people, even if they do let folks in, later this summer.
Yeah, and as I said, guys, at the top, and again, I'm not trying to jump on anybody. This particular person who gave the report may be very good and know what they're talking about, but none of us who are on the beat regularly, which is a group of about 20 to 25, who are talking to people every day, even picked up on the story or chose to comment on it. So, and then we get to the fact that we are still getting screened every day going in. We're still wearing masks out on the practice field. I think there is some hope that will go away by training camp, since we did our own internal survey and everyone on the Bears beat in the media room on a full-time basis has been vaccinated. And yet we still have all these screening procedures. What if you were trying to screen, 500 to 1,000 people coming through that one lane entrance at the security gate to Hallis Hall? It just doesn't seem feasible. But we will report on it and keep an eye on it for you as we get closer and see what happens. And that, what, I'm going to segue to a connected topic, guys, and then we'll bounce back to some Bears specific stuff. But this was what I was alluding to a few minutes ago about big NFL news that we probably should talk about, because it certainly has a big impact on the Bears as well as everybody else. And that is all this negotiating going on currently between the NFL Players Association and the owners about what training camp protocols and COVID protection protocols are going to be for the coming season. And what I find really intriguing about that is that at a time when President Biden, I don't know, who agrees or disagrees with him. I don't do a lot of studying of this, but he has said that we have a target of the country being fully reopened by the 4th of July. I know that here in Chicago, where we're based, full reopening begins this week, Friday the 11th. All restrictions are going away for the most part. We're just following CDC guidance. It kind of makes you wonder why the owners and players have to be negotiating new standards. The hope is that we will be somewhere near herd immunity by the time we get to training camp. And what's happening here, guys, and this is something that I've been studying for the 40 plus years that I've been doing this, is that the NFL Players Association is about as incompetent an organization as anyone's ever seen. Their representation of their players is shameful, but the shame is on the players since they elect and choose the representatives. And the problem with the NFLPA, guys, is that with the average career being 3.4 years in the NFL, and the majority of players now in that category, these last two CBAs have kind of done away with any middle class. Those players are going to vote for what can you get me right now? What's the most cash available? They're not going to have lockout. They'll have lockouts. They're not going to have strikes. They're not going to walk out. They're not going to be tough to negotiate. And that's why the players keep getting crushed in these deals. And with this current CBA, this 10-year deal that now goes through 2030, they got hammered. I mean, the owners got pretty much everything they wanted. The players got next to nothing. They got some improvements in some of the pension and retirement stuff. And what they keep going for is working less, less practice, less workout time during the off season, which benefits no one. And so we kind of end up in this strange situation where what the owners are doing now is looking for things to give the players that don't mean anything or cost anything so they can take more. And so you've got these, we don't know what the preseason protocols are going to be or regular season because they're negotiating for some reason. And, Sean, as we talk to some of these players, you can tell that they're a little frustrated by it. You can see by the lack of turnout of veterans by the Bears, defense, that if they don't have to be there, they're going to choose not to be there. But it's really more to make a statement than anything else. A lot of them still unhappy about the treatment of Allen Robinson. That's me reporting that off the record with some folks I've talked on the record, but with some folks I've talked to off the record. We're not going to name any names here. I don't think they have a mutiny coming or anything like that, but I know that's part of the issue. And so we've got this strange situation where it feels like everything is getting better. And the NFL is now suddenly acting like they're not going to be ready as soon as everybody else.
Yeah, here's what I know. I'm ready to move past this stuff. I mean, we're out there, like you said, Hub. At least from a media perspective, we're all vaccinated and we're out there wearing masks and doing our interviews over Zoom still. And while I understand that, I totally, I get what they're doing, but at some point they got to come out with a plan here to move forward and to move the league forward. And as you can see, I'm with you in that all these defensive players, all these veterans who are skipping are trying to prove a point. And I'm just going to be curious to see what happens as we move ahead. I don't know, are any of these guys going to show up for mandatory minicamp next week? I don't know. What do you have any sense that anything is going to change, Hub, as we look towards next week?
Well, as long as the Bears leave it mandatory, as long as they don't make the change that some other teams have made, then I expect all of them, or at least 98% of them, will be there because they'll be fined if they're not. And there's no arguing it. It's in the CBA. It's not like they can get. And by the way, those fines can't be waived anymore. Remember, they changed that rule. And so, I mean, as long as the Bears continue to say it's mandatory and they're entitled to, I do expect to see them all next week. But now you begin to wonder, with other teams having waived the mandatory designation, Kyle, is this is my point, is everything the league is doing creating more areas of dissension or potential dissension and making this more difficult on the individual teams?
I don't know. It's really hard to say. I mean, we all know that this is not what it's about at this point, right? It's the NFL Players Association trying to win one battle in a war that they're losing on a pretty much yearly basis. The thing that I guess that I find interesting is, we've seen in Major League Baseball this year a huge uptick in injuries. They were just talking about it, unfortunately, on the White Sox game last night, with tons and tons of hamstring injuries. I believe Steve Stone said they were on track for a 400% increase in hamstring injuries across Major League Baseball this year. And you worry about that with the NFL, obviously a more physical game. You don't worry about, really ACLs or things like that. You worry about soft tissue injuries. These guys need to be out there on the field on a consistent basis to be prepared to play a now 17 game season. 17 game season.
Well, and that is, it's ironic that is the heart of the problem. The players are upset, not unanimously, but certainly a strong majority, about that 17th game being added. And again, I have no understanding of why they feel that way, because what that does is instantly increase their guaranteed share of revenue by hundreds of millions of dollars. By getting that 17th game, total football revenue is going to go up by 12.5%. I mean, that's what happens if you add, one game on to 16. And so, and that revenue is going to be shared not equally, because the players screwed up. The players are only going to get 48%. The owners are going to get 52%, but they're certainly going to be compensated more than fairly for it. There is no, evidence or reason to believe that they're going to be endangered more. And this is one of the things that really upset me. I think I wrote about this, not this point specifically, but I think I mentioned this in a column, and you can find all our stuff at shawlocal.com. And we hope that you'll be visiting with us daily, because Sean and Kyle and I are certainly doing our best to give you everything you need to know about the Bears 24/7, 365. But you have a situation where J.C. Tretter, who's the president of the NFLPA, a guy who I have tremendous respect for, because it's a job nobody should want. And he's a brilliant guy, and he's also an outstanding NFL. He's a very good NFL center now in Cleveland. Of course, he was in Green Bay when he started, and Corey Linsley took his job, and now Linsley's moved on, but we'll get to that maybe in another podcast. But they issued this statement on behalf of the Chicago Bears, claiming that the Chicago Bears have decided that the majority of their players will not participate in off-season activities. And one of the reasons was they made the statement that without off-season activities last year, injuries were down. And that is simply not true. By every measure I can find, every study I've looked at, not only were injuries up, but they were up significantly the first half of the season. More serious injuries were up in addition to soft tissue stuff. And we all saw that the quality of play the first 3, 4, 5 weeks wasn't near NFL standards. And it didn't really pick up until midseason. We had a really good second half of the season. So again, they're trying to make the case that it's better for the players not to be there. And Sean, I cannot find any evidence or any rational reasoning that suggests that's true.
Yeah, I'd have to go back. I remember when that came out, when all this started. I think Tretter wrote something on the NFLPA website where, he might have cited, I don't remember where he got his injury numbers from, but I'd have to go look that up. But you're right on the overall point, Hub. I mean, we see them look towards points and scoring's up. So the league is as entertaining as it's ever been. And I don't think that that's necessarily an argument for, the quality of football being as good as it's ever been. I do remember seeing that line in that column or article that he wrote where they were talking about injuries and how well last year went without OTAs. And one of the things he pointed to was, scoring was up. And yeah, that's great, but that doesn't mean that the quality of the football is up. And I'd have to take a closer look at the injuries, because I'm with you. I don't necessarily know what they were pointing towards as to why they were saying injuries were down.
Yeah, I mean, usually if you do enough research, and we've certainly learned this on the political landscape in the last 4, 5, 6 years, you can find something to try and make your case.
Right.
I can't find anything to make that case. And then just to add to my frustration, Kyle, the statement from Tretter clearly said the majority of the Chicago Bears players have decided not to participate. Well, you know what? almost 85% of them are out there. And last I checked, that's a pretty good majority. So, even within their own statements, they're obviously wrong. I don't know if they're not communicating with their membership. I don't know what's going on here. But I do know that it is probably to the detriment. It's almost certainly to the detriment of the quality of play, and therefore eventually to the fans who are paying rapidly increasing and outrageous ticket prices to go enjoy the games.
Yeah, you aren't wrong about the quality of play at the beginning of last season. Particularly, I remember weeks 1 and 2 last year were just absolutely brutal to watch. Everything seemed to be in slow motion. And I don't expect it to be quite as bad this year, but it is going to have an impact. But we got some questions in the chat hub if we want to start diving into these as we kind of we got one. The first one I don't want to discourage people, so I'm going to throw it up here. We don't have to spend a lot of time on it. We've discussed it. I don't think our changes our opinions on this have changed at all through a couple OTAs. But since Tony asked the question, we will throw it up for him here.
TonyTram 75 on Twitter wants to know who is starting week 1, Fields or Dalton. Tony, I mean, I was actually, it's funny because this is another story idea I had coming out of yesterday, Sean, but it's interesting listening to, now that we're finally getting to talk to a lot of the players, how focused they are on Dalton as their leader and as the starting quarterback. This isn't just something that Matt Nagy told us or Ryan Pace. It's obviously been translated or transmitted, I should say, to everybody in that locker room that Andy Dalton is the starter. And so if Andy Dalton is healthy, Tony, Andy Dalton is starting opening day. I don't think there's any doubt about that. What is interesting is if he's not healthy, if he gets nicked, then do they go Nick Foles or do they go Justin Fields? Now, my best guess, and I'd say 80-90% sure, is they'd probably go Nick Foles because you've got the same reasons that Fields wasn't going to be on the field to begin with. But I'd say it's, short of injury, it's 100% at this point. It's Dalton.
Yeah, short of injury, I would be shocked if Andy Dalton is not starting in week 1. And you mentioned Nick Foles. That's a guy who we still haven't seen, Hub. We haven't seen Nick Foles this week. We were told it was some sort of personal matter and that he would be back this week. But he wasn't back yesterday. So we'll just have to keep an eye on that too.
Yeah, and that's Kyle, kind of for some of us, we think maybe a developing story. It's interesting. Listen, NFL GMs and coaches don't always tell us the truth, but that doesn't mean they're lying. And there's a fine line here. I mean, we're talking about a game. I'm not talking about integrity or personal responsibility or stealing money or something like that. To be strategic, to increase the value of their assets. They're very good at misdirection plays. Let's put it that way. Play action fakes going the other way. And so when this first came up, Matt told us, I guess it was the beginning of last week, that Nick had some personal stuff that he was attending to, that he had been in the building the other day and that they expected him back hopefully this week. Yesterday, he told us that he was saying something about Andy and Justin, and then he's turned around and said, and Nick's been working really hard too, and we're hopeful now that he may be back next week. Well, that to me is not the same thing as what he told us last week, because again, we're talking about a mandatory minicamp. And so this is where you start to wonder, Nick Foles' contract is a problem. Even though it's post June 1, it would still cost them money against the cap to move him. They've still got to eat part of that signing bonus. So, and it's more so if they cut him than if they trade him. So I'm hard pressed to see a good scenario where Nick isn't a Chicago Bear. And if he is, early on, for all the reasons that Justin Fields is sitting in the first place, even if Justin Fields is getting the number 2 reps during training camp, I got to believe that at least the first few weeks you'd see Nick Foles before you'd see Justin Fields.
Yeah, I think that if Andy Dalton is injured, let's say in the preseason, the first instinct will be to go to Nick Foles, unless Justin Fields absolutely blows the doors off the place during training camp. Then I think all bets are off. But I highly, highly doubt it. I'm talking about he'd have to be otherworldly for them to give him the start in week 1 from the sounds of it. What I think we're seeing here is a Chicago sports fan, Foles thinking about a trade. I wouldn't be surprised with the way this is developing if there is some internal strife between the Bears and Nick Foles. It could be the fact that the Bears, have made it clear that they would like to move him. Or more likely is the fact that Nick Foles probably isn't all that happy that Andy Dalton was brought into town. They drafted a quarterback, and now there's a chance he might not even be suiting up on Sunday. So we'll see how next week plays out.
It's interesting, guys, because you got to get into Nick Foles' head a little bit, and he is a different kind of cat. There's no question about that. He is somewhat soft-spoken, deeply religious. Good thing. None of this is a character judgment. He'd be the first one to tell you that. And while I'm sure he is every bit as good a competitor on the football field as everybody else in the league, you don't win a Super Bowl MVP if you don't. He can be easier to deal with, more understanding, more comfortable, if you will, in a backup role. We've seen how he's moved around through his career, and he definitely does feel, Sean, a great debt of gratitude to Matt Nagy, along with Andy Reid, for resurrecting his career that one year in Kansas City. He doesn't strike me as the kind of guy who would try and force his way out of town. And the other thing about it is, where's he going to get a better deal? I mean, nobody's trading for him to be the starter. And so he gets to sit here and collect his, $4.4 million, whatever it is. He already got the big chunk in the bonus last year. The only team that I can think of right now that has seemed somewhat desperate for a backup quarterback is the Jets. And I suppose that might not be a bad place to go, although I guess Zach Wilson is the day one starter. Would the Jets trade for him and consider sitting Wilson for a little while? Other than that, I can't find a trade for him.
No, sorry, I was going to say this could also be a little bit of just maybe he's just a bit irritated by the fact that he felt like he was made a scapegoat for the offensive struggles last year. I mean, it could be that.
Yeah, well, I'm inclined to wait and see with the Foles situation. I mean, like you said, Hub, he doesn't have a whole lot of. He doesn't strike me as a guy who's gonna be upset about something long term, and he doesn't have a whole lot of leverage at this point. So I don't know that they could find a trade partner for him. And like you said, I mean, being a backup and making for how many millions of dollars he's going to make is not a bad gig either.
And there is another possibility that we're completely missing here, guys, which is that, as I said, he is very active in his church. I know he has a not-for-profit, at least one that I think he oversees. This is, quote, voluntary, close quote, time. And he is the only one of the three quarterbacks who already knows the playbook and knows the system. And so,
that's true.
I make nothing of him not being there this week or last week. I do think it would be very curious, though, if he's not there next week, because if anybody's there, it's because it's still mandatory. And if he's not there, then that would be the tip-off that there is, some hard feelings or a problem there. But right now, I just think it's a crowded room, and I'm not even so sure. The Bears may have even suggested to him, Andy, don't worry about Nick, don't worry about getting there. It's more snaps for Andy and Justin, who are trying to learn the system. And we'll see you next week. So there's all kinds of possibilities here before we start to assume that there's a problem.
We got one more. We got a follow up from Chai Sports Fan, and then just quickly, Guy and Rahul who have a couple defensive questions. We'll pivot over to that. But I'll throw this up here for us here, Hub.
Is it true that they had a trade to send Nick Foles to Philly and he nixed it? Saw that somewhere. No, it's not true, because he does not have a no trade clause in his contract, as far as I know. And so that would eliminate his ability to nix it. My understanding is that there was conversation and that the Bears were just asking for more than Philly wanted to pay. And they're also, it's interesting, even with his Super Bowl MVP, which I'm sure will be in Eagles history forever, I was told, and it wasn't Sirianni, it wasn't the new head coach, but I was told there were some people in the front office that just weren't that wild about bringing him back, not to be the starter anyway. Now to bring him back to back up Jalen Hurts, the answer to your question is that there were we know that the Eagles and the Bears talked. But my understanding, Sean, is that the deal just didn't get struck, that it wasn't that Foles stepped in and had an issue with it.
Yeah, and that sort of goes back to what we're saying about the trade value, too. I mean, Nick Foles at this point is a rather expensive backup quarterback, too. So, these teams that are looking for backup quarterbacks, which doesn't seem to be a lot, they can find them. You could probably find somebody I don't have a list off the top of my head, but you could probably find a backup quarterback on the street too.
Yeah, you're not going to find one with a Pro Bowl season and a Super Bowl
that's a good
MVP,
point.
but yes, so you're absolutely right. I mean, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I mean, hey, if worse comes to worse, you could always get. Now I'm drawing a blank on his name. Ex-Bear, Jay Cutler's best friend, Josh McCown. You can always get Josh McCown down to retire. So, you're good there. He's only done it 4 times now, I think. But yeah, guys, I think that the problem, let me rephrase that. We don't know if there's a problem with Foles yet. We just have to wait and see. When you have your entire future invested in a young man like Justin Fields, as certainly, Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy and others in the organization do, there's nothing wrong with surrounding him with both Andy Dalton and Nick Foles. And maybe that's a good, well, before I segue, I think you said we have a couple defensive. Well, let me do this and then we'll get to the defensive questions. I just want to get Sean's take on this because I did think it was interesting. We also got a sense yesterday for the first time of how Andy Dalton feels about and is mentoring Justin Fields. And it came across as more positive, more real than I expected. Again, knowing Foles, you knew Nick was going to do whatever he could to help whoever he could. Don't really know Andy Dalton, don't know about his competitive nature. He was a little distant in his first visit with us after signing as a free agent. But he was, I think, a lot more open, a lot more relaxed yesterday, on Wednesday, I should say. I don't know when you're listening to this. And it seemed pretty clear that he is going to help Fields in any way he can. And Matt Nagy echoed that.
Yeah, he did. And I love that story he told. Somebody asked him about the quarterbacks, and he went on a little bit of a tangent about a quarterback meeting they were having where, Justin Fields they were watching the film and John DeFilippo, the quarterback coach, was telling him, hey, your footwork could be better on this play, in this specific situation, blah, blah, blah. But Justin Fields had thrown what sounds like was a really good throw. We've seen him do this before where in college where maybe it's not, the play doesn't play out perfectly, but that arm can bail him out of situations. And I thought it was interesting. Nagy told us that Flip was getting on him and didn't mention anything about the throw. And then Andy Dalton, chimed in and said, that was a hell of a throw though. And they all shared a laugh about that. But it seems like they are in a good place in that quarterback room.
Well, and here's what's interesting about that particular conversation, Kyle, and then we'll get back to our questions, this is where the comparisons to Patrick Mahomes are coming from with both Justin Fields and Zach Wilson. It's that at times, even with bad footwork and bad mechanics, because of the arm talent, they make these incredible throws. And that was the kind of thing that Sean just described that apparently happened, the story that Nagy was telling. The difference is that by that measure, Fields has so much better arm talent than Zach Wilson. This is where I keep scratching my head, is how did the Bears get this lucky? Now, we don't know if either one of them, most likely there's only one Patrick Mahomes. Now, is either one of these guys a candidate to also be one of the next bright young quarterbacks in the NFL? We'll see. But that's what's special about Justin Fields. His arm talent is unique. And that's why whenever I talk about the great quarterbacks, I put Brett Favre and Patrick Mahomes in a category of their own, because they're totally different players than Tom Brady and Peyton Manning and Johnny Unitas and pick whoever you want. The arm talent there is unique. And I think that's one of the reasons there is the excitement around Justin Fields that we're seeing.
Yeah, the arm talent is there. It's there to the point where we've seen this where with other quarterbacks is they can have an issue, a mechanical issue with their drive foot, with their hips, and that arm talent is so good that they're still able to complete a throw, and that's what you have with Justin Fields. But this kind of goes into it. I'll take this question. I'll throw it up here as we bring this all in. From Skippy Klein, he asks, why are other rookie QBs ready to start but Fields isn't? One, you are right, Hub. I don't think Zach Wilson is ready to start. He shouldn't be starting. I think Trevor Lawrence is good enough. But the difference with Jacksonville and the New York Jets compared to where the Bears are and why they don't want to start Fields is those two teams aren't ready to win. The Bears think they can win. And out of the three of us here, I'm probably the biggest pessimist or closest thing to a cynic out of the three of us. And I was talking with friends about this. I was going to ask about the Bears. I think this is a team that should win 9 or 10 games and be in postseason contention. I like the defense is solid enough. It's maybe not where it was a couple of years ago. I like the improvements they made on the offensive line. I love the addition of Damian Williams. I think the tight end group should get better with Cole Kmet. Everything points to this team being in contention, and they don't want to chance that on a rookie quarterback. Now, I do have an issue with it being Andy Dalton because I think Andy Dalton stinks, but I understand the logic. So that is why Justin Fields isn't starting and those other guys are. And once again, Zach Wilson should not be starting week 1.
Yeah, Sean, see, that's why Kyle gets to edit this stuff. We have to put our bylines on it. I mean, I'm not an Andy Dalton fan, but I won't go as far as stinks. It's but Kyle, Skippy, Kyle's absolutely right. It's really that simple. I mean, you're talking about a 1-15 Jacksonville team, and Trevor Lawrence is considered an otherworldly prospect. Justin Fields has some red flags on his report. Zach Wilson, quite frankly, I don't understand, and that's why I could see the Jets bringing in a Foles or somebody like that. But again, the Jets, you're talking about the 2 worst teams in the NFL. And so their attitude is, let's put the kids out there and let them learn together. And Skippy, when you say, why are other rookie quarterbacks ready to start? Only the ones on bad teams. Don't forget the Patrick Mahomes experience. And he's the bellwether. I mean, he's the landmark. He's what everybody wants to match now. And he sat his entire rookie season. He only got out at week 17 because they were resting Alex Smith for the playoffs because the Chiefs were a returning playoff team trying to make a run. Regardless of what the haters want to say about the Chicago Bears, Sean, they are a middle-aged, soon-to-be aging, returning playoff team that has to try and win now. And they cannot live with the mistakes that a rookie quarterback is going to make, particularly in their case, because they are kind of middle of the road. Everything's got to be right. And this is where the Andy Dalton piece comes in for me. I've been outspoken about hating the signing. I think you were better off bringing Mitch Trubisky back for a year, quite frankly. Certainly would have gone the Ryan Fitzpatrick route, which was open to them. Dalton, in his best day, is a game manager. But now think about what I just described. A game manager with a great defense and a much improved running game can be the Bears' ticket to 10, 11 wins in the playoffs, maybe even a playoff win. And if you've got a rookie out there who's making too many rookie mistakes, minimally it wipes out the good plays that he's made. And so, that's why, the ideal scenario is Fields, maybe not all season, but that's why he's got to at least watch for a while and continue to learn.
Yeah, I'm not going to echo your guys. I'm with you guys. I think I don't need to echo what you guys said here.
Well, the other, sorry, not the Zach Wilson thing. It's just in my head now. There's a reason they're the Jets too, and they have consistently failed over the last decade. It's because it's bad management. A franchise that was trying to figure it out would not put a quarterback that clearly still needs work to be an NFL ready guy on the field week 1. But they're the Jets, so they'll fail again.
Yeah, I think you're right, Kyle, but I do think we have to quantify that. Joe Douglas is just in his second year there as the GM.
I
Bob
get it.
Saleh is a rookie head coach. And so hopefully they're there to fix the Jets. But based on the Jets' history, you're right. This is what you've come to expect from that organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see here. Here. Actually, I don't know what is the situation here. I don't know if you guys have seen. What is the Trey Lance situation, sitting or starting? I forgot about Trey.
Jimmy Garoppolo is the starting quarterback in San Francisco. I mean, there's no question. Trey Lance, I think the plan is to sit 2 years, to be honest with you, Alan. Alan Dunlap sends us that question. But, the 49ers, I'm sure they hope to get Lance on the field sooner than 2 years from now. I think the plan and the hope is that Jimmy Garoppolo stays healthy, enhances his trade value. This is a carbon copy of the Alex Smith situation, except that, Niners aren't coming off a playoff season, but when we look at the injuries that they had, the thought is that they could be a contender again with Jimmy Garoppolo, who took them to a Super Bowl 2 years ago when he was healthy. So, and Trey Lance, by the way, is the best athlete by far of any of these 5 first-round quarterbacks, but he is also unanimously considered the least NFL ready. And so I do think you'll see Justin Fields start a game before you see Trey Lance start a game. Sean, I don't know if you'd agree with that or not.
Oh, yeah, I would agree with that. And it comes down to what you're saying there. I mean, Trey Lance is a really unique quarterback for such a high draft pick that we haven't seen quite like that. I mean, he doesn't have he has 1 season of starting experience basically at the FCS level. And I don't know the last time that we've seen that in the NFL, certainly not, as a top 3 pick.
I'll tell you, Kyle, I was going to say, I'll tell you who I'll compare him to. I think the last time we saw this was Cam Newton, who had the 1 year at Auburn, won a national championship, but only 15, FBS starts. I don't know if we had FBS at the time in 50 or 11 or whatever it was, but and a guy who were questions about his passing, but no questions about his athleticism and his ability to move. And so they're not, identical prospects, Kyle, but I think that's probably the best comp there.
Yeah, that's not a bad comp. And the Niners are in a similar position to the Bears. I think the Niners are even in better shape than the Bears in terms of contending now. They're going to use the veteran in Jimmy Garoppolo. I guess the question to consider here, and I haven't looked closely at their roster at the depth chart. Jimmy Garoppolo's had some injuries the last few years, multiple injuries. If he were to go down, I don't know if C.J. Beathard is still hanging around there. There was another quarterback that they had, or I can't remember who it was, but I don't know who else is on their roster.
C.J. Beathard, I want to say, is with one of the Florida teams now, but I believe he moved this offseason. But there's no question that it's Garoppolo who's blocking Lance. And remember, the Bears have told us that they were making a hard run at Andy Dalton. And I think the thought there was that if they got Dalton, then they could trade, who was free, then they could trade Garoppolo and pick up a second or third round pick. But then they pivoted. When they did not get Dalton, they decided that they were going to commit to Garoppolo for one more year because they weren't getting the offers that they wanted. So Nick Mullins actually had taken over from C.J. Beathard's number 2, but I think he may be gone too. I think they may have both been free agents. Maybe Mullen is still there.
According just some quick Googling here, according to their depth chart on ESPN.com, they have Nate Sudfeld and Josh Rosen also on the roster.
That's right. They did sign Josh Rosen, so he'll be gone in a month. But, other than that, I hope not. I don't wish ill for any kid. But you talk about – there's a classic example of a first-round quarterback, the 10th pick in the first round. The Cardinals traded up, and everybody who knew anything about draft analysis knew that was going to be a complete bust. And he's now with his 4th team in 3 years. So that what does that tell you about him? Did we have any more questions out there, Kyle?
We got 3 defensive questions in here. I'm going to go back to the top and work through them here. All kind of different, so should have some good conversation for us to end on here on the defensive side.
All right. Well, first up is Rahul Chatterjee, and I realize these may be Twitter handles, so forgive me. I'm not trying to call you names. But Rahul is asking, how do you see the defensive mentality scheme changing with the move from Pagano to Desai? Before we launch into this one, Sean, I do want to just remind everybody again, we want to give our thanks to our great sponsors from Heinz Lumber Company, 11 great Chicagoland locations. If you have any contracting or expansion or building needs, you want to make sure you get to the Heinz closest to you. If you're not sure where to find them, just go to shawlocal.com. You'll see the Heinz ad. Click on it. I'm sure it'll have a store locator for you. And we want to thank all of you always so much for being with us. Rahul, the big difference between Chuck Pagano and Vic Fangio is that Fangio was a little more willing to blitz, and Vic Fangio is the absolute master of disguising coverages. It was something that no other coordinator in the league does quite as well, and so the Bears became a little more passive in their 2 years under Chuck Pagano. I think what we will see with Sean Desai is he's going to be more willing to send extra pressure. And he is going to focus again on changing up those looks behind. Any quality NFL quarterback is going to have a pretty good idea when he gets to the line of scrimmage if you're in man or in zone. But Fangio and now Desai will probably do a little more switching in and out of that once they get to the line. But it's more about, even though when you're obviously in a zone, are you going to cover 0? Are you going to cover 3? Are you playing quarters or halves? All kinds of things that can confuse a quarterback in an offense and disrupt a scheme. Whereas Chuck Pagano was more static. He had certain coverages. He'd call him. He'd say, go out and play him. And he relied on the players to make the difference. Both systems have worked. But Sean, the reason that Sean Desai got this job, the Bears came out and said it, is that his mentor, his rabbi, the guy who developed him as an NFL coach, is Vic Fangio. And they want to get back to doing more of what they were doing with Vic and see if that'll now work better with this group than what they did the last couple of years with Chuck. Yeah, he's a Vic Fangio disciple. He studied under Vic for all those years, and I would expect him to try to use that blueprint for himself as a defensive coordinator. And Hub, you mentioned maybe seeing a little bit more blitz in there. Fangio was really good at picking his spots on when to do that. I wouldn't expect the Bears to be one of the heaviest blitz
defenses in the league. But I think Sean Desai, if he learned from Vic Fangio, he'll pick his spots and do that at the right moments. And otherwise, I do expect them to, rely on those outside linebackers like Khalil Mack and Robert Quinn to get some pressure, from their base set.
Kyle, let me just tee you up here before I want to hear what you have to say. But what's interesting, we should add here, is that under Fangio, the Bears were one of the least blitzing teams in the NFL. Vic doesn't love the blitz either, but he knew how to pick his spots. And I think one thing in particular I would keep an eye on, both Roquan Smith and Danny Trevathan are excellent blitzers. Smith had 5 sacks as a rookie, and that was something that Chuck got away from quite a bit. And so I think you're going to see more inside blitzing, but it's not like they're going to open the floodgates and be sending 5 or 6 on every play. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you said exactly what I was going to say. I expect to see a lot more blitzing out of Danny and Roquan. The thing with Sean being a younger guy, a guy that really seems to embrace the analytics, I wonder if we see a little more pizzazz out of the secondary in terms of bringing a safety down into the box for a little bit more blitzing. If we see them use a little bit more of the nickel back in terms of blitzing, trying to keep teams off balance or just overload teams. I expect Sean to have his own wrinkles in this defense.
Well, and let's call some of this what it is, guys. Sean Desai was the safeties coach the last 2 years before getting the defensive coordinator job. I would say that 70 to 80% of the Bears' fortunes relative to improvement from last year this year are going to fall on the performance of Eddie Jackson and Robert Quinn. And listen, I love Bojack, and that's all well and good. But it's not. People keep saying that his play dropped after he got paid, and that's not true. His play really dropped off the second half of the 2019 season, and that was actually right before he got paid. And so, some might suggest his play dropped off because he was distracted and he wanted the extension. That's why they gave it to him. He was still a Pro Bowl safety, but last year he didn't even resemble himself. And I don't really think it is the money. Maybe it was the scheme, maybe it was the way he was being used. I don't know. But they got to get Eddie Jackson back to being Eddie Jackson more than ever now that Kyle Fuller is gone.
Yeah, I'm going to pull this up here because this kind of ties into a question from Guy. Guys, I'm more concerned about the defense. I've not been pleased with the play of Hicks and Ejax the last few years. Replacing Kyle will be a huge task as well. Bears may have to win by shootouts. They're not going to be winning shootouts, I don't think. Not with Andy Dalton, at least. I do think Eddie Jackson – apparently it's pile-on Andy Dalton day for me. Sorry, guys. But obviously Eddie Jackson – has to get better. Hub, you hit it nail on the head. Hopefully with Sean Desai calling the defense, we'll see that improvement. I disagree about the concern about Akeem Hicks. I think Akeem Hicks has been fine. He just needs to stay healthy. I think having Eddie Goldman back next to him will help a lot. And I guess should be a little bit of concern about cornerback. Obviously losing Kyle Fuller, you're not going to replace him. Desmond Trufant, hopefully he stays healthy. Need Jalen Johnson to stay to remain healthy. But I don't think you should be overly concerned about this defense by any means.
No, I mean, it's going to be a top 10, top 12 unit. The question is, can they get back to number 1 or top 3, which is what made them special in 2018. Sean, I completely agree with Kyle. The analysis of Akeem Hicks is simply incorrect and not fair. When he's been healthy, he's been Akeem Hicks, and you can actually go back and track the games, not just that he missed, but the games where he was recovering and trying to play hurt. Because remember, he came back from that devastating elbow injury. I can't remember if it was the Vikings or the Packers game, gave it his all and still ended up on the bench by the fourth quarter and then was sat down for the rest of the season. And then last year, he came back way too fast from that hamstring and clearly was not 100%. And this was in the middle of these losing streaks that they suffered. So I think as long as Akeem Hicks is healthy, the defense is going to be better. It's not his play that I worry about.
Yeah, when he's healthy, he is such an important run stopper for their defense. And that's something that doesn't necessarily show up in the stat book, but when he's out there, he just eats up so much space and he makes it really hard for other teams to get their running game going.
I got one other thing with Akeem Hicks too. You talk about that arm injury. I actually thought he got stronger last season before the hamstring injury. Earlier in the year, I felt like he did still have the after effect of that arm injury a little bit, where he wasn't as strong with his upper body. And as he got back into football shape, which once again, with the pandemic and them having limited time to get ready for that season, I don't think that was something to be surprising. So maybe that's why he said he was disappointed. But like I said, I think Hicks got stronger until the hamstring injury happened.
Yeah, he told us, Kyle, actually early last season that he was pain-free, but that he was still trying to get complete strength back. And actually, I seem to recall a conversation I had with him via Zoom, obviously last year, where he had indicated that he was just feeling 100% when he pulled the hamstring, and so even at 80 or 90% prior to the hamstring, he was actually playing fairly well. He's just got to get healthy, and he's only, this idea of an aging team. They're not. I mean, he's 30. He's going to be 30. This is his 31-year-old season. Defensive linemen play well into their mid-30s. I mean, even Robert Quinn is 31 this year. Now he's a little more reliant on his athleticism. And normally for us to be talking about guys in their 30s losing athleticism, we'd say, what are you, nuts? Particularly those of us that have already passed or let me, how do I want to say this without giving an age? Those of us who are staring at our golden years on the horizon, you would think at 30, 31, but after you've taken the beating in the NFL for 6, 7, 8 years, that's where these guys do start to lose it sooner than you would think, but not usually. Most of these guys who are great players, like a Hicks and like a Quinn, at least into their early 30s, it's not as if they've lost it. It's more important than ever to be completely healthy, to be 100%. Don't know if we have any questions left there, Kyle.
They're actually coming in pretty hot and heavy here right now. We're going to go over to Ravi, which I'll let you take this one, Hub.
All right. It says to Sean, Kyle, and Hub, what are your thoughts on running a 4-3 again with Roquan in the middle down the line? Ravi, I have no idea why you would do that. I mean, the roster is built to run a 3-4. Khalil Mack doesn't even have a natural position in a 4-3, although he was a middle linebacker at Buffalo, and he did play it early in his career in Oakland. But Khalil Mack is built for the 3-4. Your inside linebackers, Danny Trevathan and Roquan Smith, are built for the 3-4. Roquan Smith probably is not sturdy enough to play the Mike linebacker in a 4-3. Danny Trevathan has done it, but it's not his best position. You do not have any true defensive ends on the roster. If you're going to play 4-3, you'd line Quinn up at right end. Who'd be your left end? Now you'd be loaded at tackle with Akeem Hicks and Bilal Nichols and Eddie Goldman, but you'd need another defensive end, So it's just the roster is not built that way, Sean, I guess is my response. And it's not a popular trend in the NFL. You still have more trending towards the 3-4 than the 4-3.
Yeah, it wouldn't make sense with the pieces that they have on the roster right now. And what do you do with the Robert Quinns and the Khalil Macks in that situation? I don't think that's a move that they're looking at right now.
In fairness to Robbie, I think when he says down the line, I think he's probably talking 2 or 3 years down the line. But the transition they would have to make would be such a large transition. You're pretty much calling a complete teardown. And you're right. I don't think Roquan could be the middle linebacker in a 4-3 defense. So that's just Robbie. They're in the 3-4 for the long haul, buddy.
Well, and Robbie, one other thing to realize is when we talk about sub packages, the Bears are in, all NFL teams are in what we call their sub or substitution packages, which are usually for passing situations or short yardage situations. But when the Bears go to their sub packages, which is actually about 60 to 65% of the time, they are in a 40 front more often than not. When they're not, they've got 5 guys on the line. So there's just no advantage to that I can see for the team. And again, it would be taking Roquan Smith out of his natural position and putting him in a position that he may not fare as well in.
All right, let me see here. Quickly, I'll just say for Raul, he said excellent answers. Thank you so much for taking my question. You are very welcome. Come back and join us. We're going to be doing this throughout the summer. Take a couple weeks off here just because after we get through these veteran mini camps before training camp, it is nice to take some time off, and there's really not a lot to talk about. Before I got a question here. We got 2 in here that I want to get to. There's one that I want to end on. So I'm going to go to this one first. So we were talking about it a little bit earlier.
Lenny Zelms wants to know thoughts on why so many offensive players reported, yet so many on defense skipped the voluntary camp. Lenny, for me, it's as simple as that these defensive guys are all veterans who know they have their positions locked in. Offensively, Allen Robinson's not there because he doesn't have to be. Jimmy Graham was there last week, was not there this week. There are a few offensive guys as well. But I think this is probably as simple as that the guys who are missing are the guys who are comfortable enough in their roster spot in their starting position that they don't have to worry about it. Sean, I don't know if you have any other thoughts.
Yeah, I'm with you, Hub, and maybe it has something to do with having some new quarterbacks on the offensive end and wanting to get on the same page as them. I was a little surprised to see Jimmy Graham last week. I don't know if it had to do with just the fact that he's dealing with new quarterbacks. Maybe he wanted to get some extra time in, but yeah, then we didn't see him yesterday. And yeah, like a lot of the receivers, other than Allen Robinson, everybody's kind of fighting for their spots in some way or another.
We've heard a lot, about different positions, but you look at the wide receivers, the only two who are definitely going to be on the team right now are Allen Robinson and Darnell Mooney. All these other guys have to be there or should be there, if they want to do everything they can to get jobs. The offensive line, we have a pretty good idea who's going to be on the roster, not certain, but we don't really know. There's no designated starter at either tackle position right now. You look at what else? Running back. It is interesting that David Montgomery just seems to enjoy it too much. That's why he's there. And while Damian Williams knows he's going to be on the team, he's new. He needs to come in and learn. Tariq Cohn, interestingly enough, has been out there every day, not working. He's still rehabbing the ACL. So I really think, Kyle, that this is pretty much identified by veterans who aren't worried about their roster spots, just taking advantage of it because they can, even if it's not the smartest thing in the world to do. Whereas everybody who is showing up knows that this is giving them the best chance to get a job.
Yeah, I think it's a defense that is a veteran defense that knows the scheme they're going to play, that knows who's going to be in the starting roles for the most part. On the offensive line, there's a lot of guys fighting for position, and frankly, it's an offense that needs to show market improvement from last year, and they need every opportunity to win those jobs and to be ready for week one.
And one other quick thought there, Kyle, on what you just said. Let's not forget that even though I keep asking about Sean Desai, new inexperienced defensive coordinator, how much is not having his guys hurting him? Every one of those starters on defense, except for Robert Quinn and Tayshaun Gibson, played for Vic Fangio. And so if in fact Sean is taking them, well, and Jalen Johnson, who wasn't here, but if Desai's goal is to take them back to the Fangio defense, the great majority of these guys have played it, so it's not like they've got to come in and learn it.
And on the offensive side too, you've heard so much about how the Bears had to limit their playbook last year, whether that was because of problems on the off the line or Mitch, the mentality of give him as little to have to process. That isn't the case this year. They're going to want to open up that playbook with whether it's Andy Dalton or Justin Fields. So there's a lot. The Matt Nagy playbook is a complex, large playbook. There's a lot to learn, a lot of verbiage. I'm assuming there's a lot they're trying to get installed this summer.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right about that. That again is why Andy Dalton is here. But I do think at the end of the day, Lenny, the answer to your question is just about job security.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's wrap it up here on a good question from Will K.
Who is the surprise contributor on offense and defense this year? Will, a great opportunity to shamelessly plug a column I just wrote the other day, which is who are most likely to be the breakout stars for the Bears this year. Go to shawlocal.com. You'll find some great features that Sean's done in the last few days, and you'll find this one as well. I'll give you a few names. That's really the best we can do. What I do think is interesting, though, is I was reminded going back and writing the column, the Bears in 2017 were 5-11. They fired the coach, brought in a practically new coaching staff, had a big year in free agency, and suddenly went 12-4. Well, what happened is that they rebuilt the wide receiver core by bringing in Allen Robinson and Taylor Gabriel and adding Trey Burton at tight end, and then they made the Khalil Mack trade. But even beyond that, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Kyle Fuller and Eddie Jackson, who had been nice players, became the best corner and the best safety in football. You turn it around on the other side, and you had, Robinson and Taylor Gabriel didn't have huge years, but they were much bigger than what had been here before. And you had youngsters like Bilal Nichols and James Daniels suddenly making contributions. So, Sean, as I look at this group, I think on offense, Will is actually asking about a surprise contributor, and I was talking about breakout stars. So there is a difference here. So I'll give you one of each. I think the surprise contributor is most likely to be either Marquise Goodwin or Damian Williams. I'd like to give you some of the rookies, but there aren't that many rookies on offense. I mean, Tevin Jenkins, but it's not a surprise. He's got to, he's got to be an NFL-ready starter, or else forget the offensive line. But Marquise Goodwin in the slot, if Jimmy Graham and Cole Kmet are both healthy at tight end, and then you've got Allen Robinson and Tariq Cohen, who you can line up outside or inside. If Anthony Miller is still here, and Darnell Mooney now can stay outside. Goodwin with that 4.27 speed in the slot, it could really make a huge difference, and he has done it before in his career in San Francisco. Williams, I think, is an underrated player. I think it's the first time that they have had a true number 2 back in quite a while. But I don't know how the Bears can go to a tandem back situation when David Montgomery may be threatening to become a Pro Bowler. And then on defense, the surprise contributor and the potential breakout player for me, the potential breakout player pretty much has to be Jaylon Johnson with Kyle Fuller gone. And the surprise could be Trevis Gibson. Sean, we don't talk much about him. They traded up around to get him last year. He cost him a 4th-round pick. He was brought in to be developed as a pass rusher. He's had a full season now. He's a very similar body type to Robert Quinn. He's playing behind him. And so if somebody suddenly emerges, I think it could be him.
Yeah, we saw him briefly, sparingly here and there during the season last year after, we did get to watch him a bit in training camp. And yeah, I mean, if Robert Quinn's not getting the job done, I wouldn't be surprised if they throw Trevis Gibson in there some more. And who knows, maybe he is sort of your breakout or surprise contributor. I like that one a lot, Hub. I'm with you on the offensive side. I don't know how we're defining surprise contributor, but maybe it's just because I read your column this morning, but Damian Williams is an interesting addition to this offense. And I don't know if this qualifies as a surprise contributor, but I'm going to throw Anthony Miller in there. I mean, he's obviously been a contributor, but he has the ability to have a really good season. We've seen it for stretches, and maybe if he can put it all together, maybe he is one of those guys who surprises us a little bit this season.
Yeah, Kyle, let me just throw in real quick. I think Anthony Miller is a good one because contrary to what people think that he's trying to play his way out of the roster, I think he's trying to play his way off it. I think he'd be gone already if the Bears were determined not to have him. And when you look at the talent, he is still one of the 4 or 5 best receivers on the team. So that's a good call on Sean's point. I just wanted to mention with Trevis Gibson, I'm actually suggesting the reason he could be a breakout player is if Robert Quinn is playing better and he becomes the change of pace and they switch it up. Because if Robert Quinn is wearing out the people in front of him, then here comes Trevis Gibson and nobody knows what to expect. Before you know it, he could flash and pile up 5, 6, 7 sacks.
Yeah, I like the Trevis Gibson call. On defense, that I'm kind of leaning that way, but I don't want to give the same guy. So I'll go with Kindle Vildor. I think that they really like him. I think he has the size. If Desmond Trufant, whether it's for injury or because he's lost his step because of the injuries, I think there's a good chance we see Kindle Vildor maybe starting outside at some point this season. On the offensive side of the ball, Anthony Miller is a good pick. I'm going to go with you, Hub, though. I really like Damian Williams. Perfect fit as a number 2 back. I think in an ideal situation, if the Bears are winning football games, and really I think it doesn't matter if it's Andy Dalton or Justin Fields. At the end of the year, if the Bears are a playoff football team, I think you're going to see David Montgomery in the neighborhood of 260 to 270 touches. And probably you'd like Damian Williams to be 140 and 150, somewhere in that range. I think that'd be a good breakdown for them. I think that's their best chance to be an effective offense.
Yeah, that would be interesting because 260, 270, believe it or not, would actually be a few less for Montgomery than he had last year. But that's fine. When you go to shawlocal.com, guys, read this morning's column on Williams because there's some of the numbers are surprising. I mean, he was outstanding He was very good as a backup in Miami in 17 when first Kenyon Drake and then Jay Ajayi both went down. But he was also excellent as a backup in Kansas City in 18 and 19. He averaged over almost 5 yards a carry. He put up 975 yards rushing over those 3 seasons. Also an excellent receiver. I want to say 14 touchdowns, if I'm not wrong, in those 3 years. I know he had 9 rushing. I can't remember if he had 5 receiving. Maybe it's not that many. But what really jumps out about Damian Williams, guys, a 91-yard run, a 69-yard run, couple in the 50s. He is a full 0.2 of a second faster than David Montgomery in the 40. And that change of pace, it's going to work. It's going to be interesting. I can't make up my mind, though, Kyle, if they want to make David Montgomery an all-pro running back or if they'd rather have the tandem backfield, because either can work.
Well, I think it's more of the fact that you're going to see those touches that were going to Tariq Cohen, not all of them, but some of those touches that were going to Tariq Cohen and all the touches that were going to Cordero Patterson last year, those are probably going to go to Damian Williams now.
Well, that, and now what you can do is use Tariq Cohen as he should be used
in the slot.
Third down, well, as a true third down back, or as a guy you line up in the slot sometimes. And that's what makes this whole roster thing so interesting, is that Marquise Goodwin and Damiere Byrd were both brought here specifically for that slot position. You're getting Cohen back, who can play that slot position. Miller was playing it last year with Mooney outside. Mooney can play it with Miller outside. So this is truly going to be just who seem to be the 5 best pass catchers on this team, when they put that together. And then, of course, the question becomes, can our least favorite quarterback get him the ball? So I hate to do that. Andy Dalton seems like a nice guy. And I always hope people remember that. When we do this, we try and have fun with you. Our job is to analyze objectively. You can't say somebody's good when they're bad or great when they're middle of the road. But please don't ever think that any of this is that personal, or that we want to talk down to any of the players or coaches, wherever it may be. We have gone way long this week. We do hope that you've enjoyed the conversation. That's the great thing about joining us live, is we get your questions, and we really, before we know it, we've been talking longer than we expected to. But we do want to thank our sponsors at the Heinz Lumber Company since 1892. 11 great locations around Chicago. Been 11 great locations and a great sponsor, not our sponsor, since 1892, obviously. But if you have any building needs, any construction, any additions, rehab that you're doing, please get to one of their 11 locations around Chicagoland. Our thanks to the folks at Heinz. We want to thank all of you so much for joining us, for listening. Again, be sure and go to your app store, go to iTunes, go to shawlocal.com. If you download a subscription, it'll be there for you. And watch our Twitter accounts. It's at Hub_Arkush. It's at Sean_Hammond. It's at Kyle Nabors. By Tuesday, Wednesday of next week, we will be tweeting out the exact time that we record these podcasts. And if you would like to join us via Twitter, we really enjoy having you here. We get your questions. You get to be part of the conversation. We'll take your thoughts and opinions as well. For now, though, we wrap it up this week. We hope you all enjoyed it. We look forward to talking to you again next week. Have a great weekend, everybody.